Upstate New York, November 1957. In the sleepy town of Appalachian, an extraordinary meeting was taking place. Gathered in the garden of one of the town's wealthiest residents, a gang of sharp-dressed businessmen feasted on several hundred pounds of steak. This unusual group attracted attention, and the local cops looked on astonished. What they didn't know was that they were witnessing a summit meeting of the entire leadership of the American Mafia. In fact, until that moment, many denied the Mafia even existed. Sure, there was crime, but organized crime, a criminal gang with secret initiation rites and codes enforced by sentence of death, seemed like something out of the movies. Across the Atlantic in Sicily, things were much the same. Here, in the birthplace of the Mafia, its influence reached into every corner of life. Yet its very existence was often denied. Secrecy and internal discipline gave the Mafia its power, and this power was about to go global. 1957 marked the moment the American and Sicilian Mafias became international, forming a billion-dollar crime corporation. It was a turning point in another way, too. It signaled the start of a war against organized crime that would last almost half a century. A war that forced both the US and Italy, finally, to confront the terrifying criminal conspiracy in their midst. United States in the mid-1950s. The good times were here. The country had emerged from depression and World War with a booming economy. For many ordinary men and women, the American dream had become a reality. But something else was booming too: the Mafia. For those growing up in a family associated with the mob, it was as if the outside world barely existed, apart from being a source of easy money. The Mafia is organized in groups called families. The head of the family is known as the boss, or the godfather. And the longest-serving New York boss of all time was Joe Bonanno, known as Joe Bananas. He ran the Bonanno family from the early 1930s until the mid-1960s. Bonanno's power was founded on the influence he wielded over his community in New York. His son, Bill, saw firsthand how his father operated, and himself became a leading gangster with the Bonanno family.
My father would, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, would go into this hall and sit in an office in the back, and various people from the neighborhood would come in and ask favors. Somebody had a sick child, and she couldn't pay the doctor, and my father would arrange for that. Somebody else had a husband who was cheating on her, and she wanted to know what to do. He would take care of that. That happened twice a week. So when that happens, you begin to form the ideas that when you have a problem, you know where to go.
This is home movie footage, shot in Brooklyn in 1957. It looks like any ordinary American family, enjoying the new prosperity. But looks can be deceiving. Dominic Montilio was born into a mob family in New York. Some of his relatives were senior mobsters in the Gambino crime family, another of America's leading mafia families. Montilio was aware from an early age how his relatives were unlike others in the neighborhood.
I grew up in a very traditional mob family, and it was a very different kind of life than my other friends had. You know, I noticed that from the beginning, because there was times when Well, the FBI would break down the door because, I mean, we lived in the same house with my uncle, and he was very connected.
Montiglio's uncle was an up-and-coming gangster called Nino Gaggi. One day when he was 11, Dominic ran home, bursting to tell his uncle Nino that he had been elected class president at school.
I came home all excited because I had the button, you know, it said president on it. And he said, oh, great. He says, what does the class president do? So I said, you know, teacher goes out of the room and you watch the class. If anybody does anything wrong, you write their name on the board. And he looked at me and he says, you're telling me you're a rat, you're a stool pigeon. So I said, you know, I mean, 10 years old, 11 years old, what are you going to say? And he said, well, tomorrow you got to go back and give that button back to the teacher and tell her you can't be the class president.
Il Bonanno and Dominic Montiglio both grew up in a world closed to the outside. The American Mafia called itself Cosa Nostra, our thing. But this was a world imported to America from several thousand miles away. This is where the Mafia came from. Sicily, the largest island in the Mediterranean, with a population of 5 million, less than 2 miles from the Italian mainland. Like Montiglio, Leoluco Orlando was born in 1947, in Palermo, Sicily's biggest city. Unlike Montiglio, he would grow up to fight the Mafia, not join it.
Sicily is a land of contradictions. Palermo is the capital of Sicily, is the capital of the Mafia too. Is the capital of the history, is the capital of the shame of this land.
In the Sicilian dialect, mafioso once meant bold or beautiful. From the 1860s, it became the name associated with the island's criminal element, who were often organized into families of men related by blood or marriage. But their existence was steeped in secrecy. Even discussing the Mafia was taboo, as Orlando found one day at school.
When I was 14 years old, 15 years old, I organized with other students a seminar about the Mafia and against the Mafia. The director, the Jesuit director of the school, called my parents and said, it is a scandal. Why Lucchetto is speaking about the Mafia? We have nothing to do with the Mafia, therefore we are not to speak about the Mafia. Gray area, not seeing, not speaking, not hearing. It was Sicily when I was a young student.
Joe Bonanno grew up in this world. He was a native Sicilian, born here in the pretty seaside town of Castellammare del Golfo in 1905. He only moved to America in the 1920s.
Sicily has a long history of mistrust of authority. There's an old saying back there that to know a man, you have to know his father, and his father before him, and his father before him. And once that happens, there is very little room for betrayal.
Much of the power of the Mafia derived from its ruthless discipline. Chief among these values was omertà, the vow of silence. In Sicily, all mafiosi had to take a sacred blood oath that they would never betray the organization to the authorities, and that they would always carry out the orders of their mob bosses. The novice was sworn in through a quasi-religious ceremony and became a so-called man of honor. The American Mafia followed exactly the same traditional initiation ceremony.
You're brought into a room and you're given the image of a saint. Prick your finger, enough to draw a drop or two of blood, put it on the image of the saint, put the saint in your hand, and they light it. And you take an oath, and it simply says that you hope to burn as this saint is burning if you betray your brothers.
To break this oath would mean death.
Our culture taught us to act like men. And acting like men meant keeping your mouth shut.
But for Bonanno and his fellow gangsters, omertà was more than just a vow of silence.
Omertà comes from the root manly, and it simply means to act like a man. And a man doesn't get somebody else into trouble. Therefore, he doesn't say, John did it. Who hit you in the face? John hit me in the face. A man will see to it that John gets hit in the face.
Just exactly what that meant is made clear by Dominic Montiglio. For his uncle Nino Gaggi, like other mafiosi of his generation, Sicilian traditions ran deep. His world was dominated by loyalty, secrecy, and vengeance. True to his roots, when Gaggi had his nose broken in a fight, he was determined to get his revenge, even if that meant waiting years. When the moment finally arrived, Gaggi took Montiglio and mobster Roy DeMeo with him to settle the score.
We parked a long block away from where this guy was, and he was hanging out with a bunch of people in front of a candy store, and we were waiting across the street, and I had a 22 with a silencer, and Nino and Roy both had 38s. And we waited for him to go to his car, and he was walking to his car. We started crossing the street, and then he made us, and he started to run, and we hit him right in the middle of the intersection.
Killings like this were a way of life in the Gambino crime family.
Oddly enough, it was my wife's birthday party. So we had left the party to go do this deed, and went back to her birthday party like nothing happened. You know, we opened the presents, had the cake, and that was the end of that.
Nino Gaggi was an old-fashioned gangster, a man to whom the traditional Sicilian values of the Mafia meant everything.
You know, somebody were to break my nose, I might wait a little while, but my revenge would be maybe a broken nose and a little something else, a couple of fingers or something. But Nino, the old Sicilian school, you know, that's not good enough for them. You know, they have to make it 100-fold worse than what happened to them for them to be satisfied.
The values imported by Sicilian mafiosi to the United States were violent, secretive, and mistrustful of outsiders. In America, gangsters would take these traditional values and add go-getting entrepreneurial spirit to create a whole new kind of criminal organization. Early in the 20th century, a young man was growing up in Sicily who would change the face of crime. Salvatore Lucania, born in 1897, would become infamous as Charlie Lucky Luciano, the father of the modern American Mafia. His hometown of La Cara Fridi was built on the hard and dangerous work of sulfur mining. Sulfur mines were primitive places where temperatures were so high, men would work naked. Yet these deprived laborers still had to pay the Mafia for the right to work. They were not alone. The owner of the mine would have paid up too. The Mafia squeezed money from all walks of Sicilian life. When he was 10, Luciano was one of hundreds of thousands of Sicilians who left the poverty of the islands behind and set sail for a new life in America. He soon drifted into crime. As a teenager, Luciano joined the notorious 5 Points gang, which also boasted Al Capone as a member. It was the age of prohibition. For 13 years, it was illegal to make or sell alcohol in the United States. Luciano and other bootleggers made millions supplying Americans with as much booze as they wanted. Salvatore Lucania started calling himself Charles Luciano. He gained the nickname Lucky and the scars on his neck when he miraculously survived a knife attack and beating. He presided over his criminal kingdom from a suite in New York's luxurious Waldorf Hotel. Here, he called himself Mr. Charles Ross. And he made it to the very top in 1932 with the killing of Salvatore Maranzano, then the most powerful boss in America. But the constant battles were getting in the way of business.
If there were 3 Italian mobsters in the Italian neighborhood, it was an almost certain guarantee that at least 2 of them were going to try to kill the 3rd. And the 3rd was plotting against the other 2. So bodies would wind up in the streets. To what purpose?
Luciano wanted the Mafia families to bury their differences, not each other.
We can't make money with guns in our hand, was his expression, the expression that I heard over and over again. We can't make money with guns in our hand.
His solution was to set up a body called a commission, a Mafia board of directors made up of the bosses of the 5 New York families, plus those of Chicago and Buffalo. Any boss with a grievance against another family could bring it to the commission. But for the plan to succeed, Luciano had to win the support of the other families, including Joe Bonanno, who had just taken over for Maranzano, the man whose killing Luciano had set up.
Because you got to remember, Luciano was an Americanized guy, so he talked that way. My dad always told me that Luciano talked just like those Americans. And he says, those guys are dead. I have no quarrel with you, and I know you don't have a quarrel with me. Therefore, past is the past, let's go on.
Joe Bonanno backed Luciano's plan and joined him on the first commission alongside Al Capone.
Luciano's conception was that he would meld Sicilian Mafia mores, which formed a very tight organization, with American business methods. That's basically what he came up with. A kind of amalgam that we came to know as American Mafia organized crime.
With peace, the mob could concentrate on what it knew best, making millions of dollars from its control of illegal gambling, prostitution, and extortion. Small wonder life as a mobster seemed so attractive to many growing up in post-war America. The teenage Henry Hill watched awestruck from the window of his Brooklyn home at mafiosi gathered on the street.
You know, you see those Cadillacs and, you know, and guys in suits, big black suits, and diamond rings like the size of a quarter, you know, and beautiful woman. What the is this, you know? So I walked over to that job, washing cars, sweeping them out, you know, just to hang out there. And that's how I, you know, started hanging out over there. And it was exciting, you know?
Hill would become a mobster with the Lucchese family. Another future gangster, Frank Culotta, was also in awe of the mobsters he saw as he was growing up in Chicago.
Well, actually, I grew up into that world. The neighborhood I came from, they were all outfit guys, crooks, murderers. And I sort of looked up to them and idolized them. I used to shine their shoes. They'd give me, instead of a nickel, they'd give me $1. So, I seen a lot of money then as a kid, and they impressed me. So in my mind, I always wanted to be something like that.
The ruthless discipline the commission brought to the world of crime meant the power of the mob grew unchecked. In New York, places like the waterfront became synonymous with mafia control. It used its control of the unions and fishing companies to make millions a year. It did the same across the city in industries such as construction, in which the Bonanno family was involved.
You construct a building, and you'd put in even just a 2 or 3 cent increase on the value of the cement that was used in that building, which could turn into millions of dollars.
every yard of concrete that got poured in the city, the Gambino family, the Genovese family, everybody got a piece of that yard of concrete, just through the unions.
It wasn't just one little thing, but you multiply this by hundreds and hundreds and thousands of activities that were going on throughout the country, and you got a force to be reckoned with.
In New York, the Mafia seemed to have its finger in every pie.
We ran the city, basically. I mean, we could stop a building from going up, or a movie being made, a show on Broadway. You know, I mean, you didn't do it right. You didn't do what the boss wanted you to do. You were either dead or you were out of business. It wasn't pretty.
For the most part, the authorities denied the existence of a national criminal organization. One reason was that the Mafia was busy buying protection for itself. Bill Bonanno says he would meet corrupt police officers in a restaurant to give them their bribes.
I had dinner at a little restaurant, and I was there with two other friends. And we were sitting around, and they said, "You have a look of nostalgia on your face. What's up?" I said, "You know, I used to come here in the late 40s and the early 50s, and I turned around and I said, I used to sit in that corner back there. And I used to meet with a captain and two lieutenants from law enforcement. And one of them said, well, what were you doing here? I said, we were giving them their envelopes. Envelopes for what? To look the other way while we had the gambling, we had the horse racing, the bookmaking, and the numbers."
The commission was presiding over a boom time. As he rose through the ranks of the mob, Bill Bonanno attended several meetings of the commission with his father, Mafia boss Joe Bonanno. The commission boasted it was so powerful that it could even influence government.
I can remember a time, and I participated in some of those meetings, and the decisions that had to be made were, you're going to be the next federal judge. You're going to be the next governor. You're going to be the next senator. You're going to be the next House of Representatives candidate. The men got up after those decisions, and lo and behold, it happened.
The Mafia had a power that was unacknowledged and unchallenged, until the temptation to make even more money proved impossible to resist, and finally forced the US government to act. In the United States and Italy in the 1950s, the Mafia controlled many aspects of life. Yet the governments in both countries barely acknowledged the existence of organized crime. Law enforcement had a different enemy. The Cold War was at its height. The main target of the FBI were American communists, not Italian-American gangsters.
The communist bloc has woven a vast network of espionage throughout the free world.
Communist line is uniform and deadly. Destroy America.
After World War II, in the FBI's New York office, there were 400 agents chasing communists. There were just 5 dealing with organized crime. The story was similar at the Department of Justice, where William Hundley worked.
When I took over the organized crime section in the Justice Department in 1987, there were basically, maybe 7 or 8 lawyers there who were basically clipping newspapers. They weren't doing anything either.
The director of the FBI was J. Edgar Hoover. He had been its head for over 30 years. Hoover was one of the most powerful men in Washington, eventually serving under 8 presidents. In law enforcement, what Hoover said went. And to Hoover, America's priority was the Red Menace. Hoover had almost no Italian-American agents who could infiltrate the mob. Indeed, he had few agents from any ethnic minority.
At that time, Hoover did not have one black agent. He had no female agents. Excuse me, his chauffeur was black, so he made his chauffeur an agent, so he could say he had one black agent. In essence, he had all of these waspy guys, you know, with the snap hats on and whatnot. Yeah.
But from the late 1950s, a succession of events would change all that, finally forcing the authorities and the nation to acknowledge the existence of the Mafia. Once again, it all started in Sicily. And it was a story in which Mafia godfather Joe Bonanno played a central role. In late 1957, Bonanno took a trip back to his native Sicily. He had been born here in the tiny coastal town of Castellammare del Golfo before emigrating to the US as a youngster. But Bonanno's trip was no sentimental journey. The Mafia Don was on business. Joe Bonanno had maintained close links with his family and criminal associates in the old country. He was approached by some old acquaintances for advice on a pressing problem.
My dad told me that one of the leaders of the Palermo Mafia came to him and said that there's a few people that they would like to talk to him about certain problems that they're having here in Sicily.
A meeting took place in this building, the Grand Hotel de Palme in Palermo, one of the top hotels in the Sicilian capital. Even to this day, details of who attended and what was discussed remain shrouded in mystery. Bonanno may not have been the only American present. Charles Lucky Luciano was now living in Italy, having been deported from the US after the war. Today, the Italian authorities believe that he was also present at the Hotel de Palme.
E dal 12 al 16 ottobre del 57 a Palermo.
From the 10th to the 16th of October 1957 in Palermo, in the Hotel de Palme, there was a summit of about 30 mafia bosses. American Cosa Nostra and Sicilian mafia bosses.
Famiglie americane, cioè era presente per esempio la famiglia Bonanno con il suo capo Joe Bonanno.
The major American families were represented: Joe Bonanno, Lucky Luciano, who had been in Italy since 1947, and then there were the local mafia heads.
Era presente Lucky Luciano, che era già in Italia dal 1947, e poi erano presenti i capi mafia locali, i capi mafia siciliani.
Over dinner, the Sicilians explained why they wanted the meeting. This was a business convention, and high on the agenda was the subject of drugs, which offered vast profit, but at a price.
The purpose of the meeting was to pick my father's brains as to how they were going to resolve a problem they were beginning to have among each other over the narcotics trade in Turkey.
The Sicilians faced a dilemma.
Various families within the Mafia were at odds as to whether they should or they shouldn't get themselves involved with this, and the younger element saw nothing wrong in making a profit.
In fact, the American Mafia was having the same debate about drugs. It seems that Joe Bonanno wasn't just offering friendly advice. He was there to close a deal that would reorganize the global trade in heroin. According to the FBI, it was this meeting which established the Bonanno family as the main players in the transatlantic heroin trade. The Sicilians would manufacture and smuggle the drug into the US. The Americans would distribute it and take a cut. This was the first time the mafias on both sides of the Atlantic had come together on such a scale. An early example of globalization, but run by organized crime.
Di Sicilian Connection si parla in epoca più tardi.
The foundations were laid for collaboration between Sicilian Mafia, which wasn't yet called Cosa Nostra, and the American Cosa Nostra, which had as its main objective heroin trafficking.
Bill Bonanno says the organization of the Mafia itself was also on the agenda, and that his father advised the Sicilians to copy Luciano's recipe for resolving disputes.
It was at that meeting that he suggested that one of the ways that they might resolve their problem and have a little better handle on the situation is to do what the Americans had done, and that was to form a commission.
The Sicilians did, but it would only meet a few times and never gained the authority of the American original. In America, the subject of drugs continued to dominate Mafia discussions.
The new organization that Luciano created, except one, narcotics. In the beginning, Luciano assumed that the organization